The wind swept down from the mountains, cold and sharp, as if it carried whispers from another time. Elias Carter stood outside his cabin, his breath fogging in the frosty air. The land around him stretched wide and wild, covered with pine trees and the faint traces of snow that never fully melted at this height. The mountain had been his home for 7 long years, and he had learned to love its silence, even when that silence pressed down too heavy on his heart. Elias was not a young man anymore, though he still had the strength of someone who worked the land every day. His hands were rough and scarred, his beard thick and streaked with gray. There was a calm steadiness in him, the kind that came from living close to the earth. But there was also a loneliness that had taken root deep inside. He had built this cabin with his own 2 hands, chopped every log, cleared every rock, yet it never felt like a real home, just a shelter where the days blurred together. He hadn't always been alone. Once there had been a small house on the edge of a town far to the east and a woman waiting at the door when he came home. Her name had been Ruth. She had a soft laugh that filled every corner of a room. But a fever took her before their 2nd anniversary, and the emptiness that followed drove Elias away from everything he'd known. He packed his tools, sold what he couldn't carry, and followed the call of the mountains. Up here no one asked questions. No one pitied him. The cold didn't care who you were. It only tested whether you were strong enough to stay. Years passed like that. The seasons turned, animals came and went, and Elias grew used to his own company. He trapped for fur, cut timber for trade, and sometimes walked down to the nearest town, a day's ride away, to sell what he had. People there respected him, but they kept their distance. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. He spoke little and smiled less. Still, there was something about him that drew trust. When he said he would do a thing, he did it. One evening, after a long trip to town, he stopped at the general store to collect his mail. There was a new letter waiting, unexpected. It was from an old friend, Samuel Dunn, who ran a small post office and had known Elias before he disappeared into the mountains. Samuel's handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. He wrote about a woman who had placed an advertisement looking for a husband. A practical arrangement, Samuel called it. Someone who could provide her safety and a new start in exchange for companionship and help. At first, Elias folded the letter and tossed it aside. He had no interest in foolish dreams. Marriage, at his age, it sounded like trouble, or at least more noise than he wanted. But that night, as he sat by the fire, the wind howling outside, he couldn't shake the thought. The idea of another voice in the cabin, someone to talk to, someone who might look at him not with pity but with understanding. It stirred something he had buried long ago. Days turned into weeks before he wrote back. He kept his letter short, plain, and honest. He said he lived in the mountains, that life was hard but steady. He said he wasn't a man of many words and didn't know much about fancy things. He offered what he had: honesty, hard work, and a roof that could keep out the cold. He didn't expect an answer, but the answer came. Her name was Clara Whitmore, though she didn't use her last name in the letter. She said she was from the city and wanted to leave it behind. Her writing was neat and careful. Like someone who had gone to good schools but was trying not to sound proud, she wrote that she didn't mind simple living, that she was used to work, and that she wanted peace more than comfort. Elias read her letter twice, then again the next morning. There was something sincere about her words, something that made him trust her even before they met. Over the next few weeks, more letters passed between them. They were not romantic, not at first. She asked about the cabin, the land, the winters. He told her about the chores, the snowstorms, the way the stars looked when the sky was clear. He didn't know why he bothered describing such things, but he found himself wanting her to see his world through his eyes. When she replied, her words carried warmth. She said she could almost feel the cold air he described, almost see the mountain peaks he spoke of. By early spring, the decision was made. Clara agreed to come. She would take the stagecoach as far as the nearest town, and Elias would meet her there. Samuel wrote to confirm the date. Elias read that line again and again until he realized there was no turning back. He had invited a stranger to share his life. The thought made him restless. As the day drew near, he tried to prepare. He fixed the roof, cleaned the cabin, and built a second chair beside the table. He mended the stove door, chopped extra firewood, and even brushed down the old horse that would pull the wagon to town. The work kept his hands busy, but his mind refused to settle. He told himself he expected a plain woman, someone sturdy, practical, maybe older, maybe a bit worn by life like he was. That would suit him fine. He didn't want beauty or charm. He wanted quiet company. The night before he left, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire again, watching the flames curl and snap. For the first time in years, he felt nervous. What if she turned back when she saw how rough his life was? What if she expected more than he could give? He had no fancy clothes, no proper furniture, no neighbors for miles. Just a cabin and a heart that had forgotten how to be open. The morning came cold and gray. Elias hitched the horse to the wagon and started down the narrow trail toward town. The road wound through tall pines and across icy streams, the sound of hooves echoing in the stillness. He tried not to think too much, but his thoughts wandered all the same, to the woman he was about to meet, to the letter that had changed everything. It took most of the day to reach the town. The stagecoach was already there when he arrived, its wheels muddy from the long road. People milled about, collecting luggage and greeting travelers. Elias stood back uneasy in the crowd. He hadn't seen this many faces together in years. Then he saw her. She was stepping down from the coach, her gloved hand resting lightly on the railing. For a moment he thought he was mistaken. The woman before him was nothing like what he had imagined. She was young, mid-20s maybe, and striking in a quiet, graceful way. Her coat was simple but well made, her face pale from travel, her eyes bright with curiosity and a touch of fear. Even dusty from the journey, she looked out of place among the rough mountain folk. Elias froze. His heart thudded hard, almost painfully. This couldn't be her. Surely the woman he had written to was someone else, someone less. Remarkable. He took a step forward, uncertain, and she turned toward him as if she knew. "Mr. Carter?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to speak at first. "You must be Miss Clara." She smiled then, a small, nervous smile that reached her eyes. "I am. I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "No, ma'am," he managed. "Just got here myself." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the street fading around them. It was a strange feeling, like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Finally, he cleared his throat and offered to take her bags. She thanked him and followed him to the wagon. On the ride back, the air between them was quiet but not uncomfortable. She asked about the mountains, about the cabin, about the kind of work he did. Her voice was soft, thoughtful. Elias answered simply, not knowing what else to say. He couldn't help glancing at her now and then, still half believing she might vanish like a dream. The mountain road was rough, and once when the wagon jolted, she grabbed his arm to steady herself. Her touch was light, but it sent a strange warmth through him he hadn't felt in years. By the time they reached the foothills, the sun was sinking low, painting the snow-capped peaks gold. Elias stopped to let the horse rest. Clara looked out at the view, her face lit by the fading light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He followed her gaze. The mountains he had seen 1,000 times looked different now, softer somehow. Maybe it was her voice or the way she looked at them, as if she could see something he had forgotten. "It can be harsh," he said quietly. "But yes, it's beautiful." For the first time in a long while, Elias felt something shift inside him. The silence of the mountains no longer felt empty. It felt like it was waiting for her, for them, for whatever might come next. And as the wagon rolled on toward his lonely cabin, he realized his life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. The wagon creaked as it climbed the narrow trail that wound up through the forest. The air grew colder the higher they went, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had never seen mountains like these, vast, endless, and so quiet that even her breath seemed too loud. The world she had known was far behind her now, and each turn of the road took her deeper into a life she could not yet picture. Elias kept his eyes on the road. He spoke little, but his presence felt steady, safe somehow. His face was weathered by years of sun and wind, and though he rarely smiled, there was kindness in his eyes when he glanced her way. She could tell he wasn't used to company, and she didn't want to press him with too many questions. Still, the silence felt heavy between them, so she tried to fill it now and then with small bits of talk. "It must be peaceful here," she said after a long stretch of quiet. He nodded once. "It is sometimes too peaceful," she smiled faintly. "I think I might like that." He didn't answer, but she saw a flicker of amusement on his face. It was the first time since meeting him that she saw any sign of warmth. The road leveled out for a moment, and she looked up at the snow-capped peaks that glowed orange in the setting sun. They looked almost unreal. For the first time in months, she felt a kind of hope stirring, fragile but real. By the time they reached his cabin, night had fallen. A thin line of smoke curled from the chimney, and a lantern burned softly by the window. Clara's heart fluttered as the wagon stopped. It was smaller than she expected. A single-story cabin made of rough-hewn logs with a porch that sagged a little under the weight of time. But it looked warm. Lived in, real. Elias climbed down first and helped her off the wagon. His hand was firm and calloused. She thanked him quietly, and he nodded before lifting her trunk from the back. "I'll show you inside," he said. The door opened with a soft creak, and the warmth of the fire washed over her. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Everything was simple. Wooden walls, a table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with tools, and a few old books. The floor was swept clean, though the marks of years of boots and work still showed. In one corner was a small bed neatly made. Another bed frame stood by the opposite wall, covered with a new blanket. "I built that one for you," he said, noticing her glance. "Wasn't sure what color you'd like?" She touched the blanket, faded blue, soft from use. "It's perfect," she said softly. He gave a small nod, then set her trunk near the bed. "You must be tired. There's stew on the stove. I'll fetch more wood before it burns low." When he stepped outside, Clara sat on the edge of her bed and let out a slow breath. The long journey had worn her down, but she felt something steadying in her chest now, a strange calm. The cabin was quiet. The fire crackled gently, and she could hear the faint howl of wind through the trees. It was far from the grand house she had left behind, but there was something honest about it. It felt like a place where she could finally breathe. When Elias returned, they ate together at the small table. He served her a bowl of stew, thick with vegetables and bits of meat. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and filling. They ate mostly in silence, broken only by the sound of the fire and the clink of spoons. Once or twice their eyes met, and both quickly looked away. After the meal, he poured 2 mugs of hot tea. "The nights get cold up here," he said. "You'll need to keep the fire going till morning." "I'll remember," she said. Then after a pause, she added, "You live very quietly, don't you?" He smiled a little at that, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Quiet's easier than most things." She looked at him carefully. There was something in his voice that spoke of loss, though he didn't say it aloud. She understood it without needing the words. She knew what it was to lose, to leave behind everything that once felt like home. When she finally went to bed, Elias stayed up for a while, sitting near the fire. He could hear her soft movements as she settled in, and something in him stirred, a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in years. He wasn't sure what to call it. He only knew that the cabin, which had always seemed too large and too empty, suddenly felt different, warmer, alive. The next morning, Clara woke early to a faint light spilling through the window. She could hear Elias outside chopping wood, each strike echoing through the still air. She dressed quickly and stepped out, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. The sight stopped her for a moment. The forest stretched out before her, silver with morning frost. The mountains rose behind the cabin, their peaks bright with sunlight. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Elias paused when he saw her. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The air here feels different." He gave a small nod. "Takes a while to get used to. Coffee's on the stove if you want some." She smiled and went back inside. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it warmed her hands as she held the cup. She looked around the cabin again in daylight. Everything was practical, but there was a quiet care in how things were placed. The tools hung neatly, the wood stacked evenly, even the small shelf of books dusted and straight. This was a man who lived simply but not carelessly. Later that day, Elias began showing her the routines of mountain life. How to tend the fire properly, how to haul water from the stream, how to mend a torn coat. Clara listened carefully, though some of the tasks were new to her. Back in the city, she had never chopped wood or cooked over a fire. But she tried. She wanted to learn. Each time she managed something on her own, Elias gave a small nod of approval that made her oddly proud. By the 3rd day, she began to see the rhythm of his life. Up with the dawn, out with the horse or the traps, back by sunset. He didn't talk much, but his silence wasn't cold. It was the silence of someone used to his own thoughts. In the evenings, they would eat together, sometimes sharing small stories. Her about the noise and lights of the city, him about the mountain storms that could roll in without warning. One evening, while the rain drummed softly on the roof, she asked, "Do you ever get lonely out here?" He hesitated. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "But it's different now." She looked up. "Because I'm here?" He met her eyes and nodded once. "Because you're here." Neither spoke for a long time after that, but the words hung in the air like the scent of pine smoke, gentle and warm. Days turned into weeks, and little by little they found a quiet rhythm together. Clara learned how to bake bread in the old iron stove, and Elias taught her to fish by the stream. She stumbled often, laughed at herself, and sometimes felt tears prick her eyes when frustration got the better of her. But Elias was patient. He never scolded, never raised his voice. When she made mistakes, he showed her again, slower this time. She began to see that beneath his roughness was a heart that had forgotten how to show kindness until now. Still, there were moments of distance. At night, he sometimes sat outside alone, staring at the dark line of the mountains. She could tell he carried old memories, ones that didn't fade easily. She didn't ask, not yet. Some silences were better respected. Then came a night when the wind howled so fiercely that it rattled the shutters. A snowstorm had blown in early, covering the trees in white. Elias came in from the cold, his coat soaked, and brought in a small rabbit he had found injured near the traps. Clara knelt beside him as he set it down near the fire. "Poor thing," she murmured. Its fur was wet, one leg bent awkwardly. Together they worked to clean and bandage the wound. The small creature trembled in her hands, but slowly it began to calm. When Elias looked up, he saw how gentle her touch was, how her eyes softened with care. Something inside him shifted again, an ache and a warmth all at once. When they finally sat back, the storm roaring outside, he said quietly, "You've got a kind heart." She looked at him, surprised. "It's just a hurt animal." He shook his head slightly. Not everyone would have cared. The firelight flickered across their faces, and for a brief moment their eyes held. Neither looked away. The wind beat against the walls, but inside the cabin there was only warmth. Clara turned back to the small rabbit, her hand still trembling a little. She didn't know what to say. Something unspoken had passed between them, something she couldn't name yet, but she felt it deep inside. When the storm finally eased and the world outside turned quiet again, she realized that she no longer felt like a stranger in this wild, cold place. For the first time since leaving everything behind, she felt she belonged somewhere. And though Elias didn't say it aloud, he knew it too. The mountains had been his only companion for years, but now, for the first time, he wasn't alone. The morning sun broke through the clouds after 2 long days of snow, turning the world outside the cabin into a bright sea of white. The air was still and sharp, every sound muffled by the thick layer that covered the ground. Clara stood by the window, watching the way the light bounced off the trees. She had never seen anything so peaceful. Yet deep down she felt uneasy. Life in the mountains was harder than she had imagined. Each day brought something new she didn't know how to do. And though Elias never complained, she saw the extra work he took on because of her. He rose before dawn, chopped wood, checked traps, fetched water, and repaired things before she even woke. She tried her best to help, cooking, cleaning, feeding the animals, but she often made mistakes. Once she burned a pot of stew so badly the smell lingered for days. Another time she slipped near the stream and dropped the bucket, losing their water for the evening. She hated feeling useless. In the city, she had managed a household with servants and never thought twice about the simple tasks they did. Here, every chore demanded strength and patience, and she had neither. She wanted to learn, but sometimes frustration brought tears she tried to hide. Elias noticed. He didn't speak of it, but he saw how she pushed herself, how her hands blistered from chopping wood, how her shoulders sagged at the end of each day. He admired her effort, though he didn't know how to say it aloud. He was not a man of soft words. He had lived too long with silence to know how to fill it now. One afternoon, as she struggled to split a log, he walked over and took the axe from her hands. "You're holding it too tight," he said. "Let it do the work." She frowned, stepping back. "I can do it." He looked at her, then gently placed the axe back in her hands. I know you can. Just try it this way. She followed his instructions, adjusting her stance, and when she swung, the log split cleanly down the middle. She looked up at him, surprised, a small smile breaking across her face. There you go, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Told you. Her smile lingered. Maybe I'm learning after all. You're doing fine, he said simply, turning back to his work. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating bread and stew, Clara thought about the small kindness behind his quiet words. Elias didn't flatter or joke like men in the city had. His care came through in simple acts. Fixing her boots without being asked, leaving extra firewood by her door, or patching the leaks in the roof before the next snow. It was as though he showed his heart through his hands instead of his voice. Still, she wished sometimes that he would talk more. There were moments when the silence stretched long, and she felt like she was walking beside a wall she couldn't climb. She wanted to know what he thought when he looked out over the valley, what memories haunted him in the night when he sat alone by the fire. But whenever she tried to ask, he changed the subject or gave short answers that told her nothing. One evening, unable to hold it in, she asked softly, "You don't like to talk much, do you?" He looked up from his workbench. About what? About yourself. About before all this. He paused, the knife in his hand stilling. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said quietly, "Not much worth telling." She hesitated. "Maybe I'd still like to hear it." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Some stories are better left quiet." She nodded, realizing she had touched a place still tender with old pain. That night, after he went outside to check the traps, she sat by the fire alone and wondered what ghosts he carried. The next morning brought a new challenge. A snowstorm had damaged the roof of the small barn where Elias kept the horse and supplies. The wind had torn off part of the covering and snow had drifted inside. Elias climbed up to repair it, but the ladder was unstable on the icy ground. Clara stood below, holding it steady, her heart tight with worry. "Be careful," she called. He didn't answer, just worked with steady hands hammering new planks into place. But when the wind gusted suddenly, the ladder shifted, and before she could react, it slid sideways. Elias lost his footing and fell hard onto the snow below. "Elias!" she cried, running to his side. He groaned, clutching his arm. "It's all right," he said through gritted teeth. "Just twisted it." She helped him inside, shaking from fear. He tried to brush it off, but she could see the pain in his face. His arm had swollen slightly, and every movement made him wince. "Sit still," she said firmly. "Let me look." He started to protest, but she gave him a look that silenced him. Carefully, she wrapped the arm in a strip of cloth soaked in warm water. Her hands trembled at first, but she worked carefully, determined not to hurt him more. "You should rest," she said when she was done. "I can't," he replied. "There's work." "There will always be work," she interrupted. "You've done enough for one day." He looked at her, surprised at the firmness in her voice. Then slowly he nodded. That night, while he slept in the chair near the fire, Clara sat watching him. His face looked softer in sleep, younger somehow. The lines of weariness faded, replaced by a quiet calm. She realized then how much this man carried, how much he had endured without complaint. For the next few days, she took over most of the chores. She hauled water, chopped wood, and even fixed small repairs with her limited skills. She burned her fingers once and cut herself another time, but she didn't give up. She wanted him to rest, but more than that, she wanted to prove she could stand beside him, not just rely on him. When he tried to return to work, she stopped him with a smile. "Sit down. I've got it," he grumbled, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes as he watched her move around the cabin with growing confidence. Little by little, the air between them began to change. The awkwardness of strangers gave way to something softer, quieter, an understanding that didn't need many words. They began to share small moments that lingered long after they passed. The way she laughed when the snow slipped from the roof and nearly hit him. The way he paused sometimes just to watch her hum as she cooked. One afternoon, when the sky was clear and blue, Clara suggested they walk to the stream. The snow was melting, and the water rushed fast and bright over the rocks. She knelt to touch it, smiling. "It's colder than it looks," Elias warned. She laughed. "You always expect the worst, don't you?" "Just been around long enough to know what to expect," he said with a faint grin. She looked at him, sunlight catching the edges of his beard. "Maybe it's time you expect something good." He met her gaze for a moment, then looked away, his throat tightening. There was something in her voice, hope, maybe, that scared him as much as it drew him in. He wasn't sure what she wanted from him, and he wasn't sure he had it to give. As they walked back, silence settled between them again. But it was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was full of something that neither of them wanted to name. That evening, as they sat by the fire, the small rabbit they had rescued weeks earlier hopped quietly near their feet. It had healed well, its fur glossy again. Clara watched it with a smile. "He'll be ready to go soon," she said. Elias nodded. "It's better that way. Wild things don't do well in cages." She looked into the flames. "Neither do people." He turned his head toward her, but she didn't meet his eyes. She just kept watching the fire, her face soft and thoughtful. The meaning of her words lingered between them long after the flames died down. Elias understood it, though neither of them spoke it aloud. She had come here seeking freedom from a past that hurt her, and he, in his own way, was learning to live again through her presence. As the days passed, spring crept slowly into the mountains. The snow melted into streams, and the first wildflowers began to bloom. The cabin no longer felt like a place of silence and survival. It felt alive, filled with the sound of laughter, quiet talk, and the simple rhythm of two lives slowly learning to move together. And though neither said the words, both knew something had begun to change. The wall between them was cracking little by little, letting in the light. They didn't know what would come next, but for now they had something worth holding on to, a fragile trust, a shared peace, and a warmth that neither had expected to find again. The days grew longer as spring spread across the mountains. The snow melted away, leaving behind soft green patches and the sweet smell of pine in the air. Birds returned to the forest, their songs breaking the silence that had ruled the long winter. For the first time since arriving, Clara felt she could breathe freely again. She had grown stronger over the past months. Her hands, once soft and pale, now carried small scars and calluses. She moved through the chores with confidence, fetching water, tending the small garden, baking bread, and helping Elias repair tools. The work no longer frightened her. It grounded her. Every task she finished filled her with quiet pride. Elias noticed the change, too. Sometimes when she wasn't looking, he would watch her moving about the cabin, humming softly, her hair catching the sunlight that filtered through the small window. There was a peace about her now that hadn't been there before, and he found himself drawn to it, though he tried to hide it. One morning, as they worked outside repairing the fence, he said, "You've taken to this life better than I expected." She smiled faintly. "You mean better than you thought I would?" He chuckled. "Maybe that too." "I'll take that as a compliment," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "It is," he replied quietly. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the sound of hammering echoing softly through the valley. For Elias, it felt strange, this ease he felt around her. He had spent years building walls around himself, keeping the world out. But somehow, without even trying, Clara had found her way through them. Still, he sensed something behind her calm eyes, a shadow that hadn't lifted. She smiled often, but there were moments when he caught her staring off toward the horizon, her expression distant as though she were remembering a place she wished to forget. He wanted to ask, but he didn't want to open wounds that might still bleed. The truth came one evening when the rain was falling softly outside. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Clara sat quietly, sewing a tear in one of Elias's shirts, while he read from an old book he had found years ago. Out of nowhere, she said, "Do you ever think about the past?" Elias looked up, surprised by the question. Sometimes, he said carefully. But not for long. The past doesn't change no matter how much you think on it. She nodded slowly, setting down her needle. I used to think that too, but I still can't stop thinking about mine. He waited, knowing something was coming. Her voice was soft but steady. I told you before that I came from the city, she began. That much was true. But I didn't tell you everything. She stared into the fire for a moment before continuing. I was married once. My husband was a respected man. People admired him. They thought he was kind, generous, honest. But behind closed doors, he was none of those things. He drank, and when he drank, he became someone else. Someone cruel. Elias said nothing, his hands still on the book, his eyes fixed on her face. For years I hid it. She went on. I smiled when people asked about him. I told them he worked too hard, that he was tired, that he didn't mean the things he said. But the truth was, I was afraid of him. When he died in a fall down the stairs after a night of drinking, people whispered. They said it was my fault. They said I pushed him. I didn't, of course. But it didn't matter. The gossip ruined me. Her voice trembled slightly, though her eyes stayed dry. I lost everything, my home, my friends, even my place in church. No one believed me, so I left. I just wanted to start over somewhere no one knew my name. The room fell silent except for the rain tapping on the roof. Elias felt something heavy settle in his chest. He could picture it, the pain, the shame, the quiet strength it must have taken to walk away. Finally, he said softly, You didn't deserve any of that. She looked at him then, and he saw tears glimmering in her eyes. I wasn't sure you'd still want me here if you knew. He frowned slightly. Why wouldn't I? Because people talk, she whispered. They judge. They look at you like you're the one who did wrong. Elias leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Let them talk. They don't know you. I do. For a long time she didn't speak. Then she smiled through her tears. A soft, grateful smile that reached all the way to her eyes. You're a good man, Elias. He looked down at the fire, uncomfortable with praise. Just a man, he said quietly. But that night, long after she had gone to bed, he sat awake by the fire, thinking about her words. He thought of the strength it took for her to leave everything behind, to start anew in a place as wild and unforgiving as these mountains. He realized then that she wasn't fragile as he had once feared. She was stronger than most people he had ever known. In the days that followed, something changed between them. The air seemed lighter, their silences warmer. They talked more, not about the past, but about small things. The coming spring, the animals near the stream, the garden they planned to plant. It wasn't just comfort anymore. It was companionship. One afternoon they worked side by side in the garden, planting rows of seeds in the freshly turned soil. Clara brushed a strand of hair from her face and looked over at him. You know, she said, I never thought I'd enjoy this kind of life. He glanced at her. And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else, she said with a small smile. Elias didn't answer, but his heart lifted at her words. He wanted to tell her how much it meant to have her there, how her laughter made the cabin feel less like a shelter and more like a home. But he couldn't find the words. Instead, he reached out and helped her cover the seeds with soil. Their hands brushed, and for a moment neither moved. The touch was brief, but it sent a quiet warmth through both of them. Later that evening, they sat outside as the sun dipped behind the peaks. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold. Clara leaned back against the porch post, watching the light fade. It's beautiful here, she said softly. It is, Elias replied. I forget sometimes. That's the danger of living in a place too long, she said with a smile. You stop seeing it. He looked at her, the fading sunlight catching in her hair. Maybe I just needed someone to remind me. She turned toward him then, their eyes meeting. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath, the forest, the sky, even the wind. Then Clara looked away, her cheeks flushed. I should get the fire started, she murmured. Elias nodded, though his heart was still beating faster than usual. He watched her disappear into the cabin, and for the first time in many years, he felt a flicker of something he thought he'd buried long ago, the fragile, dangerous spark of hope. That night, as he lay awake listening to the soft crackle of the fire, he thought about what she had told him. The pain she carried, the strength she had found. He realized that she wasn't the only one learning to live again. She had brought something back into his life that he hadn't known he'd lost. The simple warmth of being seen, understood, and cared for. In the quiet darkness, he made a silent promise, not to himself but to her. He would make this place a home she could feel safe in. He would build her something better than the past she had escaped. The next morning he rose early before she was awake and walked out to the edge of the valley. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. From where he stood, he could see the cabin below, smoke curling gently from the chimney. For the first time, it didn't look lonely. It looked alive. When Clara stepped outside a while later, she found him already working, measuring wood, marking lines, and setting posts. "What are you doing?" she asked, curious. He looked up, smiling faintly. "Building something." "What kind of something?" He paused for a moment, then said, "A porch. Somewhere we can sit when the sun sets." Her smile widened, soft and full of feeling. "That sounds lovely." He nodded and went back to work, his movement steady, sure. And as the sound of his hammer echoed through the morning air, Clara felt something deep inside her heart begin to settle. A quiet certainty that she had finally found the peace she had been searching for. The mountains still stood tall and wild around them, but they no longer felt like walls. They felt like a home, strong, unchanging, and full of promise. The days rolled gently into summer, and the mountains changed again. The snow on the peaks melted into clear streams that ran down through the valley, filling the air with the sound of running water. Wildflowers bloomed everywhere in purple, yellow, and white, painting the meadows in bright color. The cabin stood quietly among them, no longer lonely but alive with warmth and laughter. Elias had finished building the porch he promised. It stretched out from the front of the cabin, wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table. From there they could see almost the whole valley, the green trees, the winding river, and the mountains standing like silent guards beyond. When he first showed it to her, Clara had simply stood there speechless. The morning light touched the fresh wood and she felt tears sting her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He had smiled shyly. "Thought we could use a place to sit when the day's done." They had spent many evenings there since then. Some nights they talked softly, telling small stories about their days. Other times they sat in silence, just watching the sunset turn the sky to gold. Neither of them needed many words anymore. The quiet between them was easy, filled with understanding. Life settled into a rhythm. Each morning Elias would head out early to check his traps or work on repairs around the cabin. Clara would tend to the garden or bake bread, the smell of it drifting out through the open window. She had grown into the life she once feared she couldn't manage. Her hands moved with certainty. Her laughter came easily now, and her eyes, once shadowed by pain, shone with quiet peace. Sometimes Elias caught himself watching her with a strange ache in his chest. He had known many kinds of loneliness, but he had never known what it felt like to truly belong to someone. It frightened him a little, the strength of it. But it also filled him with something he had long thought lost: hope. One late afternoon, a storm rolled in from the mountains. The wind howled, the sky turned dark, and rain came down in sheets. They hurried to close the shutters and bring in the tools from outside. When it was done, they sat together by the fire, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Clara turned to him and smiled softly. "I used to hate storms," she said. "They made me feel trapped. And now?" he asked. "Now they make me feel safe," she said. "Because I know you're here." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. Her fingers curled gently around his, and for a moment the storm outside didn't matter. When the rain finally stopped, the air smelled fresh and clean. They stepped out onto the porch. The world glittered with raindrops that caught the last bits of sunlight. In the distance, a rainbow stretched across the valley. Clara laughed softly. "I can't remember the last time I saw one of those." Elias looked at her and said quietly, "It's been a long time since I noticed one." She turned to him, her expression tender. "You notice everything now." He smiled slightly, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something that had been growing slowly, quietly, like the roots of a tree deep in the earth. That evening, as darkness settled over the valley, Elias sat outside long after Clara had gone to bed. The air was cool, the stars bright. He thought about how far they had both come, from strangers to companions, from broken souls to something close to whole again. He knew what his heart wanted, but the words caught in his throat every time he tried to speak them. The next morning, he woke early and walked down to the river. The sun had just risen, painting the world in pale gold. The water was cold against his hands as he washed his face. He looked around, at the tall trees, the mountains, the cabin in the distance, and he made up his mind. Later that day, while Clara was tending to the garden, he went into town. It was a long ride, the trail winding down through the forest. He hadn't been there in months. When he arrived, he went straight to the small general store. The shopkeeper greeted him kindly, surprised to see him after so long. Elias bought only a few things: flour, nails, salt, and one small item he tucked carefully into his pocket. By the time he rode back, the sun was setting behind the peaks. Clara was standing on the porch waiting for him. She waved as he approached. "You were gone all day," she said when he dismounted. "Had to get a few things we were running out of," he said. "You should have told me," she said gently. "I would have come along," he smiled. "You'll come next time." That night after dinner, he sat quietly by the fire, turning the small item in his pocket between his fingers. It was a simple silver ring. Not new, not fancy, but carefully chosen. It reminded him of her, plain at first glance, but beautiful in the light. When Clara finished washing the dishes, she came to sit beside him. "You've been quiet," she said softly. He nodded, looking at the fire. "Been thinking, about what?" "About how different life is now," he said slowly. "How this cabin doesn't feel like just mine anymore." She tilted her head, studying him. "It feels like ours," she said. He looked at her then, really looked, and all the words he'd been holding back finally came out. "You've made this place a home, Clara. You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have again. I don't want it to end." She blinked, surprised. "End?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. Her breath caught when she saw it. "I don't have much to offer," he said quietly. "Just this cabin, this land, and the promise that I'll do everything I can to make you happy. Will you stay here with me? Not just as my companion, but as my wife?" For a moment, the world seemed to go still. The fire crackled softly, and outside the wind whispered through the pines. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was steady. "You don't have to make me happy, Elias," she said. "You already have." He exhaled a deep breath of relief and joy and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She laughed then, a sound so full of life that it filled the cabin. "I think this is the first time I've ever been truly happy," she whispered. Elias smiled, his voice rough with emotion. "Then I'll do my best to keep it that way." They sat together for a long time, hand in hand, watching the fire burn low. When they finally stepped outside, the moon was high, silver light spilling across the valley. The world felt new again. In the days that followed, they began to build more, not just things of wood and stone, but a life together. Clara planted more flowers along the path to the porch, brightening the way. Elias fixed the barn roof and added a small corral for a pair of horses he hoped to buy. They made plans, small and simple, but filled with meaning. Sometimes, when Clara caught him working with his usual focus, she would stop and just watch. There was something peaceful in seeing him there, this quiet man who had once lived only for survival, now living for something far greater. And sometimes, when Elias came in from his work and found her humming softly as she baked or read by the fire, he would feel a swell of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. He never said much, but he showed it in 100 small ways, fixing her chair when it wobbled, carving her a new wooden spoon, or leaving wildflowers in a jar by her bed. As summer deepened, the valley grew golden with sunlight. On the evening of their wedding, simple, quiet, witnessed only by the mountains and the sky, they stood together on the porch Elias had built. The air was still. The horizon glowed with the colors of dusk. Clara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, if things had been different, I might never have found you." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then maybe everything happened the way it was meant to." He nodded. "Maybe so." They stood there until the stars came out, the world around them silent except for the whisper of the wind through the trees. For years to come, people in the nearby town would sometimes speak of the quiet couple who lived up in the mountains, the man with the strong hands and the woman with the soft voice. Some said they had been lonely souls who found each other by chance. Others said it was fate. But for Elias and Clara, it didn't matter what people thought. All that mattered was the life they had built together, steady, peaceful, and full of the kind of love that doesn't need grand words or promises. As the first chill of autumn touched the air, they sat once again on their porch, watching the sunlight fade across the peaks. Elias reached over, took her hand, and said quietly, "This view never gets old." Clara smiled. "That's because we never stop seeing it." And with that they sat together as the day slipped into night, two hearts that had once been lost now completely at home, not just in the mountains, but in each other.